Hi everyone. So I have an interesting subject to talk about today. I was reading an article, somebody was writing about the redwood forests in America. He lived very close to these redwood trees. Redwood trees are pine trees that grow enormously high. They are incredibly impressive. I think they're the tallest pine trees in the world, actually. And a lot of them have been burned down in the fires in America. But anyway, he lives very close to one of these pine forests and used to walk every single day. I mean, he lived there for like 20 years, and every day he would walk into the forest and touch the trees, hug the trees, sit down there and meditate in the trees. And one day, to his surprise, the trees started to speak to him. And he wrote down something that they spoke about quite recently, about what was happening in the world. And the trees, redwood trees, were just saying that whatever's happening is exactly as it should happen, and that this is the way it is. And there have been many catastrophes in the history of this planet before. Not the first time. We had dinosaurs and they disappeared. And everything was an evolving process towards something better and something more beautiful, and that's evolution. But that's not what I really wanted to talk about. It's really about this thing of being able to talk to trees and trees talking back. That's what fascinates me. I mean, there are a lot of people that are animal whisperers, for example. I know quite a few, even in Cape Town area, that can talk to animals. And especially when cats get lost, for example. Sometimes these animal whisperers are able to connect with that cat and help you to find them again. There are animal whisperers that seem to have a special contact with elephants in this country. And I've mentioned a story before. But there's a lady here I know that has communication with the baboons, for example. And I think anybody who has a dog or a cat in their home always feel that they are connecting with them and that they are having a conversation. And we even talk to our animals, don't we? There's also a book that I'm reading at the moment about Findhorn. Findhorn is a place in England called Findhorn. But a group of people established a little community there. And the area that they established was impossible to grow anything. I mean, it was not, there were local bushes, indigenous bushes and some trees there, but it was very sandy and terrible weather, winds, lots of winds, and wind blowing off the sea that was really cold. And so it was really unhospitable for growing plants. But they were really had lost their jobs. They were very poor and they needed food, and so they decided to grow. And after a while, they spoke about connecting to nature divas, the divas that looked after the plants. And that was so interesting because eventually they were able to establish a very, very famous agricultural, I guess, community there. And they were growing vegetables that were astonishing. They had nature lovers and biologists coming to study what was going on there because they couldn't understand how these plants could grow in that kind of condition. Even though there was compost, nevertheless, these plants were growing amazingly big and unusual. And so Finland became a big, more and more people came and settled there and lived there, and despite the very harsh environment, and were able to continue to grow these plants and able to speak to there was one chapter in this lady talking to the moles, getting the moles to move on because they were causing such a lot of damage. So, yeah, and I've even written a paper on the power of prayer, showing that prayer, people praying for somebody in a hospital setting could have an effect. It was a hospital in America where every second patient was prayed for. And all the people that were praying had was the name of the person. They didn't even know what the diagnosis was. They just knew the name of the person. And in that particular study, the people that were prayed for had much, much less complications and did much, much better than the group that wasn't. So even praying from a distance seems to have an influence. So, I mean, what's going on here? I mean, people talk about having communication with angels, for example. So there is a long history of people communicating with animals, with plants, with devas, angels, connecting to mountains, speaking to trees. What's going on? So the trouble is, of course, as I keep mentioning, we've split the subjective and the objective world, and the objective world, which can be measured and seen and weighed and is regarded as real, and the subjective world is not real, and which is totally crazy because our whole lives, our reality is mainly subjective. We feel, and even what we see is actually not happening out there, but happening inside us. So our whole world is kind of like a dream. And we need to understand that. So the subjective world, as I keep pointing out, is probably more real than the objective world. It's just that there's a split happening there. And science has made claim to that which can be measured and weighed. But our reality is more subjective. And even the scientists will talk about inspiration, which is another interesting phenomena because, if we talk about intuition, for example, where does intuition come from? Not from the thinking mind. That's why it's called intuition, because it's arising from the unknown into the known. So intuition is a bridge between the so-called unknown and the known. So what is this going on then? I mean, if we can pray, we can speak to animals, and trees can speak to us. Clearly, there's a reality that's somehow underneath the objective world. There's a reality that holds up the objective world in a kind of way, even. So when we talk about living force, I mean, all these ideas we keep talking about, we're talking about something which is, what can I call it, deep in the unknown, which emerges into the known. So our reality is much more subjective than it is objective. And intuition is when the area, that intelligence that is in the unknown emerges into the known. So, my understanding is that the world that we see is the top of the iceberg, and that underneath is this whole intelligent aspect of reality that is constantly emerging into the world that we see and know and measure, but actually it's hidden, and we are like that too. There's a part of us that is obviously objective, like our bodies and our eyes and our nose, but our world underneath all that is subjective. So we have this subjective aspect which is constantly manifesting into the objective world. As my hand goes up, thought which can't be measured, but my hand goes up and you can see that. So it's a fascinating area that we need to begin to live and understand. Because when you understand that there's a whole part of you that is soaked in this mystery. And that mystery is somehow intelligent. And when you do art, for example, it's the great unknown expressing itself into the known. So we are the great unknown expressing into the known. We really recognize ourselves as the known, which is unfortunate because otherwise we would begin to explore that part of ourselves that are in the unknown as well. So we are unknown and known. We are subjective, objective. And we are the whole. But the real essence of who we are is sitting in the unknown. And we tend to assume that we are the known, so we play around with our body and dress it up and pretend that our body is who we are. And that's not who we are. That's the objective side. We actually are much more subjective than objective. Have a good day.